headlines. The Korean government decides to re-examine its new tax code proposal after President Park Geun-hye calls for a revision to the controversial plan following criticism that it caters only to the rich and hurts the working and middle classes. A prolonged heat wave gripping most of the country prompts spike in electricity use as the country struggles to keep its power reserve at a safe level, with 6 nuclear reactors still out of service for maintenance. In a run-up to the Middle East peace talks, Israel approves a plan to build more Jewish settlement homes, provoking the Palestinians to question their sincerity in finding a breakthrough of the two sides' diplomatic paralysis. These stories and more next on Primetime News. Good evening and welcome to Primetime News. It's Monday, August 12th here in Korea. Live from Seoul, I'm Yoo Ji-hye.
And I'm Sean Lim. Thank you so much for joining us. We start with the ongoing debate over who should foot a bigger tax bill to fund the nation's new welfare policies. Just 4 days after announcing an overhauled tax code, the government says it will give the plan another look.
This follows mounting criticism that the changes would favor the rich and leave working and middle classes in the lurch. Kim In-bin reports on the developing story.
The government is set to review the recently announced tax code following heavy political backlash, which some say favor the rich and large businesses. During an emergency press conference late Monday evening, Finance Minister Hyun Oh-seok said his ministry would now re-examine the tax code from scratch.
We will revise the bill so it will become less of a burden to middle and lower class workers and look into ways to increase medical, education, and child care benefits, among others.
The change in course came just 4 days after the initial proposals were made, and hours after President Park Geun-hye issued a statement on Monday morning, calling on the government to look into the controversial plan again. She emphasized that it shouldn't cause more of a burden to the working and middle classes. The tax code proposal that was made last Thursday, which increased taxation on some 4.3 million salary workers with an annual income of more than $31,000, drew criticism from the opposition party and the workers. The opposition Democratic Party argued that would put an excessive burden on the middle class and low-income salary workers, and took to the streets in protest. So it's back to the drawing board for the Finance Ministry, which says it will draft a new revision plan and then discuss the issue with the ruling party. The DP, for its part, is still not satisfied. They said the government and the ruling party caused unnecessary confusion by releasing the tax proposal, only to scrap it and start the process over again from scratch. Kim In-bin, Arirang News.
As the nation continues to suffer from an oppressive heat wave, Korea is again on high alert for impending power shortages.
Officials report blackouts are just a minor problem away as a 500,000 kilowatt generator went offline over the weekend due to a mechanical issue. Our Chi Myung-gil has more on how the government is responding to a possible energy crisis.
In the face of a looming energy crisis, Korea's energy minister said Sunday the government is doing all it can to secure sufficient power reserves.
Even minor problems at any of the country's power plants this week could lead to serious consequences, such as nationwide blackouts that we experienced back in 2011. The government is doing all it can to secure additional power reserves.
During the first 3 days of this week, the government has strongly urged all office buildings, homes and factories to save electricity during 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. The country's electricity demand is expected to reach its annual peak, topping 80 million kilowatts, which would cause the country's power reserve to dip below 2 million kilowatts. The government has banned all government agencies from turning on air conditioners through Wednesday. To add to concerns about this unprecedented demand, a 500,000 kilowatt generator at a thermal power plant in Tangjin, located in South Chungcheong province, was shut down on Sunday.
The generator turbines were vibrating too much that we had to abruptly shut it down. We are trying to find out what caused the problem.
Repairs are underway, but officials say it will take at least 1 week before operations can resume. Another thermal power plant generator in Seocheon, South Chungcheong province, was temporarily suspended Monday morning due to problems with the pumping system, but operations resumed an hour later. Chi Myung-gil, Arirang News.
And Korea is not the only nation in the region feeling the energy pinch. Other Asian countries, which have been enveloped by the heat dome, have also had a hard time using nuclear energy to keep up with electricity demand.
Our Yurian reports on how this is fueling concern about their high dependence on nuclear energy.
To countries like Japan, Taiwan, and Korea that lack natural resources, nuclear power has long been an essential source of energy. But safety concerns are causing many to reconsider the continued use of nuclear power. Just last week, the Taiwanese government announced one of the country's nuclear power plants may have been leaking radioactive water for the past 3 years. The leak was identified at the first nuclear power plant located at Shimen, not too far from the densely populated capital, Taipei. The use of nuclear power on an island like Taiwan has long been controversial, as a major leakage could contaminate the entire area. Activists use the example of the Fukushima nuclear accident when they call for a complete ban on nuclear energy in the country. The Japanese government also announced last week that 300 tons of radioactive water is pouring out of the Fukushima plant every day. It also admitted the plant operator's TEPCO is still struggling to handle the situation some 2.5 years after the accident. Here in Korea, 6 of the country's nuclear reactors are sitting idle, 3 for maintenance work, and the other 3 after they were found to contain parts with fake safety certificates. More plants could be subject to a shutdown as the investigation continues to see if additional test certificates have been faked. With so many of its nuclear power plants out of action and the scorching summer weather yet to reach its peak, the nation is bracing itself for a possible blackout. As one of the cheapest sources of energy, it's no wonder North Asian countries have become highly dependent on nuclear energy. A third of Korea's electricity comes from nuclear power, a third as well for Japan before the 2011 earthquake and tsunami, and nearly 20% for Taiwan. Yurian, Arirang News.
Taking you now to North Korea. The reclusive state, for the first time in 39 years, amended the founding principles of its Workers' Party, which are the law of the land in the north.
And our Han-daeun says one of the laws has apparently been rewritten to legitimize the hereditary transfer of power to Kim Jong-un.
Kim Jong-un, in his latest attempt to carry on the legacy of his family's rule, has amended the 10 founding principles of the nation's Workers' Party. The founding principles, experts say, have been a critical tool used by the Kim family over the last 6 decades to legitimize their dictatorship. They were last amended in 1974 when former leader Kim Jong-il was named as Kim Il-sung's successor. The most notable amendment this time, according to South Korea's Chosunilbo newspaper, can be found in clause number 1. It went from, "We must honor the great leader Comrade Kim Il-sung with all our loyalty," to, "We must honor the great leader Comrade Kim Il-sung and General Kim Jong-il with all our loyalty." By adding Kim Jong-un's father Kim Jong-il and putting him on par with state founder Kim Il-sung, the principle, by default, now idolizes the current young leader. In Item 1, Article 3, the word dictatorship of the proletariat has been removed, while the Juche revolution was added. The Juche idea, which translates into spirit of self-reliance, has long been a term used by the North Korean government to justify its policy decisions while isolating its people from the rest of the world. Kim Jong-un also didn't forget a check and balance for the state's top military and party officials. He added a new clause in Item 6 that reads, "All actions that go against the principles conducted under the authority of individual party officials must be strictly banned." Pundits say the clause partially reflects the instability of Kim Jong-un's leadership. North Korea and the principles also included language that states the country has built a strong military based on its nuclear power. It's the first time nuclear-related items have been included. Han-daeun, Arirang News.
Officials in Panama say they have found more explosives in the North Korean ship they detained about a month ago.
This comes as the officials say they wrapped up the search of the ship that was held in Panama for carrying undeclared arms from Cuba. Panama's security minister said that the authorities found equipment for launching missiles in the last unopened container in the ship. Authorities removed and opened 25 containers in total that were hidden beneath sacks of sugar. Pyongyang is banned from buying or selling arms under sanctions by the United Nations. In the coming days, UN officials are expected to be in Panama to see if the found cargo did violate those sanctions. The two Koreas will return to the negotiating table on Wednesday in the North Korean border town of Kaesong as they try to reopen their jointly run factory zone in the north.
Many say the seventh round of talks are crucial in determining the future of the industrial complex. To tell us more, we're joined now by our Unification Ministry correspondent Hwang Sung-hee in the studio.
Yes, Hwang-hee, what do you make of the timing of this much anticipated inter-Korean talks?
Ji-hye, you have to consider the timing of the talks. Now, it comes nearly 2 weeks after the two Koreas walked away from their last meeting, which was the sixth of its kind. Then the North offered to resume dialogue following Seoul's decision to hand out state-funded insurance payments to South Korean companies with operations in Kaesong. Now, once the companies receive such compensations, the government would seize the rights over their assets in the border town, and many saw this as their first step toward a complete shutdown of the complex. Also, the meeting is being held just days before South Korea and the United States begin their annual Ulchi Freedom Guardian joint military drills. Experts say once they kick off, any momentum gained in the Kaesong talks may be broken. Joint military drills, as you know, between Seoul and Washington earlier this year were one of the events that prompted Pyongyang to unilaterally shut down the Kaesong industrial complex in the first place.
So 6 rounds of talks have ended in failure. Are we going to be talking about the same issues this time around?
Well, Sean, operations at the Kaesong industrial complex came to a halt in early April after the North pulled out all North Korean workers amid tensions in the inter-Korean peninsula. Now, the shutdown has resulted in nearly $1 billion of economic losses for South Korean businesses with operations in Kaesong. So Seoul wants a guarantee that Pyongyang will never push ahead with such unilateral closures again, while also assuming responsibility for the current prolonged shutdown. Now, these are the key issues that will be discussed on Wednesday. But the North doesn't appear to have changed its stance. In its most recent proposal for talks, the North said that both Koreas will work together to prevent future shutdown.
North Korea and South Korea must prevent future closures of the Kaesong industrial complex and ensure that operations will not be affected by political situations.
Well, North Korea had previously made a similar offer in its draft proposal, but the South had labeled it as being insincere.
Right. So North Korea doesn't, seem to be open to closing down the complex for good. Why is it so determined to save the factory zone?
Well, the Kaesong industrial complex serves as an economic bridge between the two Koreas as they try to overcome 60 years of mistrust. Now, if the business park faces complete closure, that would mean an end to the last remaining symbol of economic cooperation between the two Koreas. More than 53,000 North Korean workers are employed by more than 123 South Korean companies, that is, at the factory zone. The business park has prospered since it opened in 2004, with its total output snowballing from $15 million to around $1.5 billion in less than 10 years. Now, for North Korea, it is also a source of hard currency as the South pays $80 million in workers' wages per year, which is probably another reason for the cash-strapped nation to save the complex from closing down.
So what's the general consensus going into these talks? Are experts optimistic?
Well, you have to note that Pyongyang has yet to protest against the upcoming military drills between South Korea and the United States, which is scheduled for next week. Last year, the North ramped up its rhetoric 2 weeks before the Ulchi Freedom Guardian drills began, calling it an exercise for war. And in March, Pyongyang threatened to scrap the inter-Korean armistice agreement ahead of a joint military drill between the South and the United States. This time around, the North has been quiet, and experts say that's because Pyongyang may not want to risk doing anything that could jeopardize the Kaesong talks. Such views come in line with comments made by North Korea's point man for cross-border affairs, Kim Young-gun, during a recent meeting with a Korean-American businessman. Kim apparently said that success at the joint business park would likely lead to further inter-Korean cooperation.
Kim made it clear that if the Kaesong Industrial Complex does well, so will other plans to develop the DMZ.
So the general consensus is that the North will maintain a conciliatory tone in hopes of a swift normalization of the joint factory zone, but will react aggressively should the two Koreas fail to reach an agreement on Wednesday.
Right, Song-Yi, hopefully we'll get to see some significant progress being made at the inter-Korean talks. Thank you very much for your report today.
My pleasure.
Before your day ends and another begins, get the latest news live from Seoul.
Residents whose features restrictions is on the rise. Closing ceremony.
Expert analysis from Asia's heartbeat.
The legislature circumstances.
With a viewpoint only Korea's global network can provide.
The United States, the latest report.
Unrivaled access from a team always on standby.
Came on maneuver trying to cover up the South.
It's been 35 years since China and Japan signed the Treaty of Peace and Friendship, but bilateral relations are far from friendly these days. With no official events marking the milestone, the 35th anniversary of the peace treaty passed by quietly. A forum with experts from both countries was scheduled to take place in Beijing to commemorate the agreement, but was postponed at China's request. That fits the recent trend with no high-level political contact between Beijing and Tokyo for almost a year now. A territorial dispute over the Senkaku or Diaoyu Islands is at the center of the strained ties, along with a host of unresolved historical issues. Another one of the few surviving Korean victims of Japan's wartime sexual slavery has passed away. The House of Sharing, a shelter for sex slave victims, confirmed the death of 87-year-old Lee Yong-nyo on Sunday. Lee left the country at the age of 16 and was forced to provide sexual services to Japanese soldiers in Myanmar during World War II. Since 1995, she had been one of the leading activists in protesting against Japan's wartime atrocities, demanding a sincere apology from the Japanese government. With her passing, there remain just 57 registered Korean sex slave victims awaiting for that apology.
Days left until Middle East peace talks resume. Israel has approved a plan to build more Jewish settlement homes in East Jerusalem and the West Bank. The decision has incensed the Palestinians who are questioning Israel's sincerity leading up to the peace negotiations. Oh Jin-ju reports.
Israel approved the construction of nearly 1,200 new homes for Jewish settlers on Sunday, just 3 days ahead of the resumption of peace talks with Palestine. The Israeli government plans to build about 800 new settlement units in East Jerusalem and 400 in the West Bank. There are concerns Israel's move could derail the upcoming talks, with Palestinian officials criticizing the approval and urging Israel to make decisions that contribute to the peace process.
Who does these things are determined to undermine the peace negotiations, are determined to force people like us to leave the negotiating table.
However, Israel strongly denied such claims, saying the settlement expansion has nothing to do with its commitment to the peace talks.
The policy is always on the table. We said at the Bayit Yehudi party that we will not stand against the peace talks. I have the responsibility as the Minister of Housing to find our young couples houses all over Jerusalem and also in Karne Shemron, Ariel, etc.
Meanwhile, the Israeli government has published a list of the first group of 26 long-term Palestinian prisoners it will free on Tuesday. Israel has promised to release a total of 104 prisoners, a condition agreed upon for the peace negotiations to move ahead. 14 of them will be transferred to the Gaza Strip and 12 to the West Bank. However, Israel made it clear that should any one of them engage in hostile activity against Israel, they will have to return to finish their sentence. Oh Jin-ju, Arirang News.
The South Korean fencers at the World Fencing Championships in Hungary were looking to add to their 2 bronze medals on the final day of the competition.
And we have Stephen Che in the Sports Center to tell us how they fared. Stephen, how'd they do?
Hey guys, the Korean men's team unleashed their foils while the women's team thrusted their sabers in hopes of attacking, lunging, and flicking their way to more podium finishes. Kim Ji-yeon started the team off Friday with a bronze medal finish in the women's individual saber event, followed 1 day later by the men's 4-man team taking the bronze in the team saber. Fast forward to today's action, the men's foil team beat Venezuela to get to the round of 16, but were outmatched by Great Britain when they got there. Meanwhile, the women's saber team cruised into the round of 8 after a bye and defeating Germany, but ran into a nimble Russian squad who took the decisive victory. It was a disappointing day for the Koreans, who will have to return home without a gold or silver at the championships. And moving to the greens, the PGA Championship crowned an unlikely winner on Sunday, and he was Jason Dufner. He had melted down in the same event 2 years ago, but this time around, he was as cool as ice. He hoisted the winner's trophy at the Oak Hill Country Club in New York after shooting an overall score of 10 under par and easily beating out runner-up Jim Furyk. The 36-year-old pro almost tasted victory at the same event in 2011 when he lost in spectacular fashion after holding a 5-shot lead with just 4 holes left. But he made that up by tying the record for the lowest round in any major with a score of 63 on day 2, which paved the way for the first major win of his career. And now it's time to talk domestic baseball. The KBO took a day off today, so let's get right into the standings. Samsung was only able to split both of their 2-game series, but was able to keep their top spot with their win percentage. Meanwhile, it was all business for the LG Twins, who were able to eke out 5 wins in 6 games in 6 days last week, creeping closer to the top spot. They remained just 1 game below the Lions. Tucson sits behind first by 6 wins, while Nexon sits behind by 7. Looking at the bottom half, the Lotte Giants gained against the 4th-place Nexon Heroes, sitting just 2 games behind them now, while Kia fell to 3 games behind the Giants. All the while, SK surged to half a game behind Kia as NC and Hanwha remain in the last 2 spots. Well, that does it for me here in the Sports Center. This has been Stephen Choi. Check back in at midnight for the latest in the world of sports.
Well, the heat today certainly didn't show any signs of easing up. Let's find out more by going over to our Kwon So-hwa at the Weather Center. Hi there.
Hi guys, it was Malbok today, one of the 3 supposedly hottest days here in Korea when we eat samgyetang, of course. But every one of the next 7 days will unfortunately feel the same.
So no relief in the near future.
Right, yeah, it looks like we'll have to grin and bear it until at least Sunday or Monday. Now, currently, if we take a look at our map here, nearly all parts of the country are under a heat wave advisory or warning, with the exception of parts of Gangwon province, and this is all due to a high pressure front situated in the North Pacific. So please get ready for the heat tomorrow too, but also take care on the roads during the morning, for there will be some fog in the far west, down south, and also some inland regions. Now when that clears up, we'll be left with mainly clear skies, but also some clouds now and then. Now those, however, should not be able to shield you from the sweltering temperatures we're seeing here. Daegu and Gwangju will be extremely hot at 37 and 36 degrees respectively. The capitals Seoul and Busan top out at 33 degrees. And let's take you over to other places. 33 is also expected on Jeju Island, and Daejeon soars up to the mid-30s, and not that different on Mount Kumgang. Now, I hope you're doing okay in the heat, and I hope you'll join me for another update after midnight.
Thank you, So-hwa. And that's our broadcast on this Monday night. I'm Yoo Ji-hye in Seoul.
And I'm Sean Lim. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you soon.